Negotiation is an important skill for software engineers. The salary that you negotiate at the beginning of your job could be a difference of tens of thousands of dollars over the course of an engineer's career. But intimidating recruiters and exploding offers can scare many engineers from negotiating at all. Today, Haseeb Qureshi returns to the show to discuss his epic story of salary negotiation. On a previous episode, Haseeb discussed leaving his career as a poker player to join a coding bootcamp and start down the path of a software engineer. In this episode, Haseeb describes his approach to the job search and the salary negotiation process, which eventually landed him at Airbnb with a $250,000 annual salary. That's after about a year of learning to code. I really enjoyed talking to Haseeb because his opinions are both unconventional and well-reasoned, which is the perfect combination of a person to sit down to a podcast conversation with. Haseeb and I go way back, and this is just a treat for me, so we ended up talking for quite a long time. Some quick announcements before we get started. The Software Engineering Daily community has started working on a project called Software Daily. We are building an open source news and information site about software. And if you're a web developer working with web development tools like React.js or Flux architecture or Node.js or really anything that's web related, check out the Software Daily repo, which you could find by going to softwaredaily.com. And if you want to contribute to Software Engineering Daily in a different way, you can also go to softwareengineeringdaily.com, where you can find this podcast, as well as links to the Slack channel, my Twitter account, my email. You can find the Software Engineering Daily newsletter. You can also find out how to host a show or to get involved in contributing to the outlines that I prepare for these shows. In any case, I would love it if you checked out softwaredaily.com or softwareengineeringdaily.com. And with that, let's get to today's episode after a quick message from our sponsor. I had a crazy idea a couple weeks ago. It's a photo sharing app that only has pictures of cats. When I finish my photo sharing cat application, I will be deploying it to Linode, because Linode is the fastest hosted Linux provider. I don't want to get locked into a proprietary platform that's going to overcharge me as soon as my app gets popular. I just want a fast Linux server with simple pricing. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. Plans start at $10 a month, so my free $20 will be plenty to launch my cat photo sharing app. Once I need to scale, I can use tools like node balancers and backups, and Linode has built-in dashboarding and metrics so that I can see the traffic to my Linode servers, and I can understand how many of my users are posting cat pictures and looking at each other's cat pictures. Go to linode.com/sedaily and get $20 in free credit today. The plans start at $10 a month, so it's a great deal. Thanks to Linode for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Now let's get on to this episode. Haseeb Qureshi is a software engineer at Airbnb and the author of several blog posts documenting his transition from poker player to coding bootcamp graduate to full-time engineer. Haseeb, welcome back to Software Engineering Daily.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jeff. Good to be back.
Yes, it's great to talk to you once again. So on the previous episode, you talked about your transition from poker to software engineering via bootcamp. And at that bootcamp, you wound up being a director of product. And then eventually you decide to leave and go on the hunt for a job as an actual software engineer. So I want the topic of our conversation to focus on that job search and the negotiation for your salary at the job that you ended up getting, because this is a topic that many people are very curious about. So why don't you give us a snapshot of where you were at the beginning of your job search?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick recap for anybody who either didn't view the episode or doesn't know anything about me. So I came out to Silicon Valley in April of last year, 2015, and I really had no background whatever in coding. I knew like a little bit of HTML and CSS that I'd kind of cobbled together over the years, but other than that, I was essentially a blank slate. So I decided that I wanted to come into tech for a number of reasons. I applied to App Academy, which was a top coding boot camp in San Francisco. I got in, finished the boot camp. I basically worked my ass off, graduated from the top of my class, and I was offered a job as an instructor there. So I joined the school and started helping them to teach. 3 months later, I was promoted to director of product. And so as director of product of the boot camp, essentially what I was doing was kind of working more on the business side and the product side, trying to decide, how we should better form the product, how can we improve the boot camp experience, what other kinds of services can we offer besides just a straightforward coding boot camp. And so I did that for about 9 months. And I'm sorry, it would be not 9 months exactly. I think about 7 months. And after a certain point, I kind of decided that I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing that much anymore. I wasn't really being that challenged, and more of my role had kind of moved more towards business and away from, computer science and software engineering, which was really kind of what got me in the game to begin with. So I kind of thought to myself, all right, I'm not that happy doing this. This feels very far away from the thing that I originally came to Silicon Valley to do. And I spent most of my time thinking about what was going on at other companies, which seemed like a sign that maybe I shouldn't be here. I should be somewhere else. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do a job search. And originally I wasn't really sure what I wanted my career trajectory to be within App Academy. I just knew that this, was immediately a good opportunity and that's something I should pursue. And I wasn't actually even totally sure that I wanted to go into software engineering as sort of the direct route. But I think spending so much time away from it, I was like, man, I'm really kind of itching to code and to build things and to work on hard engineering problems. So the idea was, so I was still working as an instructor as well. While I was director of product, I was also teaching in the course, giving lectures, things like that. And so I decided that I was going to, kind of follow the advice that I was giving to a lot of my students in effecting a job search. So first thing I did was I, wrapped up all my projects, finished up, having like nice solid apps on my portfolio that I could show to potential employers. I worked on, prepping myself for algorithms and data structures and stuff like that, which I was already pretty comfortable with, stuff that I'd studied, to some degree over the last year since coming into the field. And basically I started applying to companies. So just sending out applications, cover letter, resume. And I think, at the time I was working full time. I was still director of product, and I hadn't told anyone at that time that I was leaving because I wanted to have some leads first and wanted to make sure that I was getting some traction, kind of had some idea of where I would be in my job search before I told App Academy that for sure I was leaving. And of course, I had a conversation with them about how I was feeling and that I wasn't totally satisfied. So what ended up happening was every single company that I applied to rejected me. They rejected me without interview, pretty much without any kind of technical conversation whatsoever. Every single time my resume just got immediately trashed. Now, my background before coming to App Academy, in case people aren't aware, so I used to be a professional poker player for about 5 years. I got my degree in English with a minor in philosophy. So my background, and I worked after being a poker player as a poker coach, and I wrote a book about poker. So my background is just totally, it seems very, very profoundly non-technical and totally orthogonal from anything.
Although in some contexts, the background would be a major positive, and probably if you talk to a lot of top executives, and you show them your resume, they would be like, wow, this is really interesting. We should definitely talk to this guy. But perversely, at the lower level, like entry level software engineering positions, it probably worked against you.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, I think being strange in a way that people don't know how to classify is almost always a bad thing when it comes to trying to pass a filtering system, which largely, resume screens and inboxes are designed to be filtering systems. And so in some sense, it's unsurprising that I wasn't getting through any of these places. But it was at least surprising to me at the time because, so I knew that App Academy students or bootcamp students in general, especially in the Bay Area right now, it isn't the easiest thing in the world to get your resume looked at and to get on the phone with somebody and actually have your skills evaluated. And so I knew that, but I also knew that, for former instructors at App Academy, so people who had been on the teaching staff, they tend to have not a bad time. So actually, I remember I knew one guy who was part of one of our instructors. He didn't even have to apply to any companies. Basically, he got contacted by recruiters from Uber and Google, and those are the only two companies he talked to, and he ended up getting offers from both of them. And so I kind of thought, knowing that that was similar experiences that I've heard from other people who are on the teaching staff, that it shouldn't be a problem. Like I'm going to be totally fine. And it was the exact opposite. I applied to 20 plus companies and didn't talk to a single person.
And so with your 6 or 7 months of experience, throughout that experience, as when you were at App Academy, were you getting any emails from recruiters?
No, not really. I mean, I did. I got. Because I was on AngelList, I would occasionally get pings from folks. But I think actually
not established companies.
Yeah. Well, also I think since I became director of product, since my role changed from being on the teaching staff to being in sort of the product side, business side, that completely ended. Now, while I was director of product, I was actually doing software engineering. Because App Academy has a number of internal applications that we use for like classroom management. We manage like our application funnel and our website, and I was they're Rails apps, and I was doing a lot of the development on them, and also doing like a lot of software architecture stuff when we were trying to build new systems, but none of it seemed to matter. It was my name and the stuff that I was doing on my resume was just seemingly so far away from what people were hiring for that I was just not getting through to any of these companies.
So you blasted out resumes to 20 or 25 jobs, and you got no callbacks from any real people. You just got turned down by the automated systems. And what you did next was you talked to one of your former students, and the former student got you inside 23andMe for an interview. And tell me what happened when you finally got inside 23andMe for a job interview.
Yeah, so 23andMe was the first company I got an onsite from, and the guy who referred me was actually a peer of mine when I was in boot camp, and he was working at 23andMe. And so he referred me. He thought I was really solid coder, and when I went into the onsite, I thought I killed it. I mean, I did like all the problems. I knew exactly what to do. I finished with tons of time. And they were all, I think, fairly CS heavy questions. And I thought I blew it out of the park. And so I remember when I was going home, waiting for the train in Mountain View, I was just like, man, that was so awesome. I just totally nailed that. I could tell everybody I talked to was impressed. It feels great to interview. That was fantastic, And I was basically waiting for them to give me a job offer because I was like, they brought me here. I completely blew it out of the park. I'm just waiting for them to call me back. And it turned out about a week later, I got an email saying that the quote unquote, the position had been filled and they didn't want to move forward with me.
What do you think happened in retrospect?
It's a good question. Someone asked me this before. I have no idea. And I think probably the reality is a lot more mundane, where probably, I think a few things are possible. One is that somebody just didn't like me, or that somebody just like kind of gave a blocking no, and who knows why, for just some arbitrary reason. Or it could have well been that perhaps they literally were like, we need to hire 2 people, and 2 people just got hired at that point.
I think the former seems more plausible.
It's certainly possible. Because these things are possible.
Because speaking personally, I'm a big fan of you. Obviously, we're good friends, but I know that sometimes you can come off as intimidating or other types of off-putting behavior I mean, it can be off-putting to some people. I mean, like for our, when it was our experience, it was like discussing poker hands or whatever, and this behavior, this play is totally stupid. Why would you ever do that? And in that context, like, it really helps to hear harsh criticism. It's great to hear your negative feedback or whatever. But the behavior that we grew up playing poker, and the behavior of like harsh criticism and just like extreme candor turns out to not be welcome in all corporate contexts. And I think it's hard to iron that out.
I mean, that's certainly true. That said, I don't think that was really present in my interview.
Okay.
I mean, it was a pretty tame interview. It was,
You weren't like, obviously you reversed the linked list this
No. I mean, I know, I think I know enough about how to communicate diplomatically, especially in the context of a job interview, that I'm not going to like lambast my interviewer. That said, I did have one interview, and it kind of pops to mind. One of the interviews I had, actually the question that, so the question that I was given, actually, I probably shouldn't repeat the question because it was, yeah, okay. But basically, the question kind of boiled down to basically an algorithm to find the n. Let me see if I can find a good way to put this. Basically, the n smallest elements in a collection, yeah, that's essentially the way you can do it.
Heap sort.
I'm sorry?
Heap sort.
Well, so ideally do it without sorting. And the way that I solved the problem was using an algorithm that the person who was giving me this problem was not expecting. And I ended up using QuickSelect which is an algorithm that's kind of like based off of Quicksort, and it happens in linear time. And I'm trying to. I don't remember the exact problem, but I do remember that QuickSelect was the fastest way to solve this. And he wanted me. The solution he wanted me to use was with a heap. And so I was like, oh well, I can actually do this faster with QuickSelect. And he's like, I don't know what QuickSelect is. And I was like, oh well, it's an algorithm that can do XYZ in linear time. And he was like, well, that I'm looking it up on Wikipedia. It looks really hard. I don't know if that's a great idea to write that algorithm. And I was like, no, I can do it. Like, just if you want me to do it, I can do it, and it'll solve it in linear time. And he was like, if you really want to, but I really think you should try it another way. And so I finished it with QuickSelect, and it was totally fine. And then he was like, oh, okay, well, can you think of a way to do this with a heap? And I was like, yeah, I could, but it would be slower. And he's like, just do it with a heap. And I was like, why would you want me to do this with a heap? This is literally slower than solving it the way I've already done.
All right. Well, I think you have answered our question.
I was pretty diplomatic about it. I was like, I don't think I was, lambasting him in any way. I think I was.
But that's the thing, Haseeb. There's no way to diplomatically tell somebody that, I'm sorry, you're trying to tell me that 2 + 2 = 5, and then I should, add up 2 + 2 to equal 5 because it's easier than doing 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 = 4. Even though that's more factual. Yeah. And anyway, I would guess that that's what happened, but who knows? These things are hard to tell. Okay, so let's move on to the more interesting parts of this process. So you got this rejection. You were still getting rejected from these, all these other things you were just emailing in. And these rejections continued until you started getting some offers. When did you start to get offers?
So I started getting offers. So shortly after I got rejected from 23andMe, I ended up getting, I applied to all the job platforms. I applied to Hired. I applied to basically all the Hired knockoffs. I applied to, I was on AngelList, hitting up companies. I was sending out applications. I was doing everything, and nothing was landing. So the two avenues that turned out to be fruitful were, one, trying to get referrals by talking to people I knew, basically plumbing my network, especially for people who knew of me, had worked with me. So largely they were my students and people who were colleagues when I was at App Academy. And the other thing I did was I got on TripleByte, which I believe you guys have actually interviewed before. So they're a YC company that basically they do like blind screening. So, you apply to TripleByte, you do their anonymous online test. They don't know what your background is. They don't know your resume. They don't know how many years experience you have. It's basically purely based on can you code and solve problems. So I got on their platform, interview with them, and they decided they wanted to work with me. So through TripleByte, I got introduced to 3 companies, Gusto, Flexport, and Heap, I think. And I ended up getting most of my very first offer that I got was actually through, I can't remember which was the first one now, but it was, I basically got 3 offers roughly simultaneously. I got Gusto through TripleByte. I got Yelp through a referral that I was, actually a referral who was not an engineer. So a salesperson who had referred me at Yelp. And then I got actually TripleByte itself asked me if I wanted to work for them, and they ended up making me an offer. So I sort of got these 3 offers right out of the gate.
And these early offers were for less money than you expected, and you didn't want to take them because they were for less money. But you were able to use these offers to clean the scent of failure and suspicion off of your body.
Yeah, no, it took a long time to clean it off. I'm not sure it's still all the way off yet, but yeah, no, it was. I mean, the offers were. I mean, I was really ecstatic to finally get offers because I very much had this feeling like, wow, I don't know that I can actually get a job as an engineer,
right,
regardless of my skill level. And these offers were just a huge sigh of relief in terms of actually knowing that, okay, I am employable. You know, somebody thinks that I can actually do this job. But all of these roles were explicitly junior, and the salaries were, you know, basically on the absolute junior end of the scale. Now, at the time, I was like, okay, well, you know, that's kind of unfortunate. I would think that, you know, this is basically the same kind of offer that a student of mine a year before, or basically that if I had graduated App Academy a year before and just straight gotten a job at one of these companies, this is exactly how much they would have offered me, which tells me that to some degree, maybe my experience just means nothing. You know, maybe they don't think that the time that I've spent teaching, you know, computer science and web development and actually doing software engineering for App Academy, it's all a wash, which maybe it was. You know,
so it was either that or the market was somewhat inefficient and you were going to have to play the game a little bit longer than you expected.
Yeah, that was certainly also a possibility that
turned out to be a reality.
I wasn't hoping for that much more. I was just hoping like, okay, I at least want to be making what I'm making now as director of product, because it just feels so. I don't know. It feels like taking a step backwards, right? Mm-hmm. And I was at some point resigned to maybe that's what I'm going to have to do. But as much as possible, I was like, I would, you know, it is to some degree a, you know, just cognitive bias, but I want that not to be the case, you know.
So were these exploding offers?
No. So actually, so Gusto. Yes. Okay. So actually, thinking about the offers again now. Yes, some of them were supposed to be exploding offers, and actually, so I'm writing a blog post that probably at the time this podcast goes out, it'll be already published. And one of the things that I talk about in there is exploding offers. And the number one thing about exploding offers, and this is exactly what I did when I got them, is you have to reject an exploding offer. Exploding offers just make it impossible for you to effectively negotiate or actually, you know, get your value and make sure that you're making a good and reasoned decision about where you want to end up. And so one of the offers that I got was exploding, and basically meaning that it would come due in 3 days, and after 3 days the offer would have expired and I couldn't accept the job anymore. And basically at the time of getting this offer, what I told them is that, oh yeah, so I see here on the offer letter, you know, it says that this is going to expire in 3 days. You know, I'm in the pipeline with other companies and I have other offers. There's no way that I can do this. Like, this offer is basically, I basically can't accept this offer at all or consider it seriously if you have a 3-day timeline. And the moment that I said that, kind of with just essentially, basically like waving it off, like this offer is essentially worthless to me if you don't give me a reasonable timeline, such that like you might as well just trash it. Like, there's no point in giving this to me. The moment that I said that, they were like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, just ignore that. You know, we'll change that. You take however time you need."
Right.
And I think that, you know, the vast majority of people who take offers or who receive offers that are exploding, they don't push back. Or if they push back, it's in the meekest of ways, where it's like, "Oh, you know, is there any way that I could get another day or another 2 days?" And then they usually will say no, because you have almost no leverage, and they can tell that you're not going to push back that hard.
So let's take a step back here, because I think what's important to note here is that many times when people are entering the job hunt, it is in an attitude of desperation, and that is how recruiters are able to exploit people with things like exploding offers. Like an exploding offer is actually an extremely effective tactic for recruiters in most situations because the employee is typically somewhat desperate, really wants to get out of the job or just got fired, or the job is about to end for some reason and they don't want to have a gap on their resume where they can't get a job. But you were able to sort of eschew that desperation. I guess, was that just because you were confident, or was it because your downside was kind of capped because you already had a job where, you weren't really going to get fired from?
Well, so, I mean, those things are certainly true that, one, I had a job. Two, I had at least one other offer in hand at the time I knew that I was getting at least one other offer by the time I got this offer letter. But I think, I mean, this is easy to say, but maybe it's even easier to say because, you and I were both poker players at one point, that, I'm fairly certain that even if I only had one offer, I would still react the same way to an exploding offer. Because my goal was very much, my goal when I enter into the job market is I want to get the best job that is the best fit for me and is what I want. And when I receive a job offer from a company, like, I can very immediately see, there are a lot of great things about this company. Otherwise, I wouldn't be interviewing there in the first place. But I can also tell probably that it's not, or that it's very possible that there's another company that is a better fit for me. And a job is a huge, huge commitment. It is a huge opportunity cost. And just having a job itself as opposed to having a potentially better one is a huge opportunity cost. But then there's also the opportunity cost of actually having a better monetary offer, right? So there's not just like, well, if I accept this job at Yelp, there's definitely no way that I can work at Google, and maybe it's much better to work at Google. But of course, there's also like, well, if I accept this job right now, then there's no way that I can make any more money than what Yelp is offering me, even from Yelp itself. So there are a lot of opportunity costs that come from just accepting an offer without negotiation. And an exploding offer is the best way for a company to impair your ability to negotiate. And so, yeah, I'd say that even if I only had one offer, and I wasn't really even sure that I'd have another one, because I knew, one, that I was applying to other companies and in the pipeline to other companies, I would say absolutely, unequivocally, like, yeah, this is just a non-starter. This is just not going to work.
So I want to fast forward a little bit because I want to get through the story so we can talk about the broader context. You interviewed at Google Next, and you ended up with an offer at Google, which you parlayed even further. Because the stench of failure was off of you. The recruiters knew that you were actually a qualified candidate, especially because you had the Google offer. So your confidence was teeming. The recruiters could sense it in your emails. You started telling recruiters at these different places you were interviewing, hey, I've got a Google offer. And they were like, oh my God. And they started bidding higher and higher. You had Uber and Twitch and Stripe and Gusto, all these hot companies. And you started, your eyes are on the ball. You're seducing the recruiters. You've got, algorithms and data structures and email diplomacy, all just seething out of your fingertips. How were you playing the different offers off of each other? Because basically the punchline of this story is that you got a bunch of offers and you used them to bid against each other. So give us a synopsis of how this process went.
Okay, yeah. So actually, I kind of want to correct you a little bit because, so this is I think a common way that my story gets summarized is that I got a bunch of offers to start a bidding war, quote unquote, or get them to bid against each other, which is not really true. I applied to these companies because, one, I liked all these companies and I wanted to work there, and two, I had no idea how many of the companies would actually give me an offer, right? So I didn't go into a job search thinking I'm going to get 8 offers so that I can start a bidding war among companies. First of all, I don't think that's a really good idea. That's a huge waste of time because if you know you're going to get Google, then there's no point in getting, and you know that you want to work at Google, then there's no point in getting a bunch of offers from startups because Google doesn't really care that much about what a startup offers you. If you want to work at Google, you should get offers from Google and its competitors. So like Google, Facebook, Amazon, whatever. Those are the people who Google is going to get into a bidding war with, not startups. If you get a job at, it's kind of same thing, right? You want to be competing in the right category. So I did not apply to a bunch of companies so that I could start a bidding war. And every single company that I applied to, I actually liked and wanted to work at. And I think it's a really bad idea, just sort of, a priori, to apply to a company just to quote unquote get into a bidding war. Because one, you probably won't be able to convey very effectively that you want to work there. And the company just probably will not want to really work with you if you aren't actually genuinely enthusiastic about the company or what they do. So that's one thing. It's actually pretty hard to fake. And so the other thing that I want to say, though, is that like the idea of a bidding war, again, it sounds very, very intentional and very dramatic, right? Like it sounds like you're in control. I was never that much in control. I mean, I tried to be in as much control as I could be, but I was very much, at the whim of different companies and their timelines and, stuff like that. So I was negotiating once I had offers and deciding where I wanted to end up. But I did not intentionally use companies just to like raise their offers in the hope that maybe they would raise someone else's offers. I think that's generally a bad idea.
So at each decision point, when you're thinking about an email to send to a recruiter, were you keeping in mind the best case scenario and the worst case scenario? How are you doing the calculus and of the expected value of these different outcomes?
Yeah. So, when I'm talking to a company, one thing that I want to know is how good of an offer can you give me, right? I want to know that because I have to know in some part of my mind, there is some offer you could give me that would be so good that I would sign with you instead of with Google or Uber or whatever, right? If you are talking to a company and you cannot think of that number or you cannot think of a potential configuration of offers such that this would be the best one, then you shouldn't even be talking to that company. Like you should just ignore them. And that is what I did actually with a number of companies. So I mentioned that I didn't negotiate with every single company because there were some companies that I knew like there is actually probably not a realistic offer you could give me that I would want to work for you over one of these other companies. And so I didn't waste their time. Because I just think that that's a thing you should do is not waste other people's time or their resources because it is actually expensive for them to do this dance with you. And so with companies that were companies that I was willing to consider, right? With them, I tried to see what is the best offer that you can give me. And like when I was talking with Uber, when I was talking with Twitch, when I was talking with Yelp, I always had in mind there is an offer you can give me that will make me want to work for you. And I think if you're not going into it with that in mind, one, I think the recruiter will sense it. Like, again, most people are not very good at subterfuge. Like, it's not that easy to lie continually to someone and not seem like you're lying. And recruiters are like professionals. They do this for a living. They are very good at telling when somebody is just kind of negotiating in a flat sort of, just pure utilitarian way. And when somebody's actually trying to find a deal that's going to be attractive to them.
So not to take poker analogies too far, because I know we're not really talking about poker here, but
sure.
It's interesting because in poker, you can see your opponent's stack. So you know the maximum that you can win. This is particularly relevant to no limit and pot limit poker. But when you're negotiating with Uber and Google, their stack is essentially infinite. So are you basically looking for are you more looking for a is it binary, like basically is it like does the offer make me feel really 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 excited to work here, yes or no, that's what I'm looking for? Is that how you look at it? Or
I mean one thing, yeah, it's a good question. So one thing to be mindful of is that there's like you have a certain value in the market in some abstract sense, right? It's really impossible to quantify like what that means. Like what is my value as a software engineer or as any particular employee? You can't really answer that question. The only thing that you can do is see what am I worth to various companies, right? And there might be a company out there to which my particular subset or intersection of experiences is actually worth way, way more than it would be to this other software company. And one can imagine that maybe if I applied to an ed tech company, they'd be like, oh wow, your experience at a boot camp is like so valuable to us that we're going to pay you way more than what Google will be willing to pay you because you're so much more valuable to us, right? So that's certainly possible. And so your goal, I mean, the thing is like you can't really go into a negotiation thinking, okay, I want to know exactly how much money you have and I want to try to take all of it. Like that's, first of all, that's not really the way that a company like Google or any large company operates, because they are really, like there's no possible universe in which Google will give you $1 billion offer, even though they have $1 billion in their coffers. But there is like, in some abstract sense, there is an upper bound on what they're willing to pay people. Google has that for sure. Some startups are more flexible, but there is also somewhere an upper bound, right? Your goal should be not necessarily to hit that upper bound, but to get as close to it as possible by communicating your value as well to them as possible, as well as you can, right? And so, so I think one example of this is that when I got initially the offer from Yelp, the offer that I was given was for an explicitly junior position. It was essentially like a new grad, someone who's fresh out of college, which, some people might think that's really great. Like, you don't have a CS degree, so that's a great position to be in. But then, I don't know, about a week later, without any prompting on my part, they decided to level me up. And so they told me, actually, no, we're not going to bring you in as a new grad. We kind of went on autopilot there. We are actually going to bring you in at sort of, level 1, or I don't know, whatever the level is for Yelp that has like, years of experience. So they were bringing me in as though I had worked somewhere as a software engineer for a year. And part of this, I think, was through my conversations with them, is communicating that, I think that I can provide more value than just somebody who's a new grad. And by seeing this, they were like, oh, actually, yeah, we agree. And because of that, we're willing to offer you more because we think you offer that extra, iota of value. So that, I think, is like the fundamental thing. So there are two fundamental things that you can do. One is that you can convince them that you're more valuable. That will make them want to increase their offer. The second thing that you can do is you can convince them that somebody else thinks that you're more valuable, right? So now that somebody else has to be in the right reference class. So it has to be, for example, for Google, it has to be another Google type company that thinks they're really valuable, right? If it's not a very Google type company, like if, I don't know, Goldman Sachs wants to pay you a crap load of money, Google's like, well, great for you, but that doesn't really give us any signals that we care about, right? But if Facebook wants to give you a boatload of money and Google doesn't, Google might be like, oh, okay, well, that to me is a sign that maybe we got something wrong.
Right.
And we are going to basically assume that Facebook is right and we're going to offer you a comparable amount of money, if not more, to get you over Facebook. So that's like the second sort of lever that you can pull to try to make your offer stronger.
So eventually you got an Airbnb interview and that went well. You got a $220,000 offer from Airbnb. How did you wield that offer to the Google recruiters? Like, what was the method of diplomacy you used to essentially say, hey, I've got this higher offer from Airbnb? Like, I don't know. Tell me about the process from that point on.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to tell. Basically, at that point, I had turned down all the other offers other than Google and Airbnb, and I was really strongly leaning towards Google until Airbnb gave me their offer, and I chatted with some of the folks, some of the hiring managers at Airbnb, who really, really turned me on to the company, and at that point, I was in final conversation with my Google recruiter. I had told her pretty much all the other offers that I'd gotten. So one of the things about Google, so Google is kind of its own beast. And I think pretty much any company that's Google-esque, so, Facebook, Amazon, any of those tech giants, they kind of operate in the same way, where your negotiation ability is really constrained by your other offers. There's not a lot that you can really do to convince them that they should pay you more, other than, one, having a really convincing alternative, especially from a comparable company. So, like, you cannot talk your way into a better Google offer. Like, you just cannot, because they just have a Google recruiter has a really tight playbook, and they are not actually allowed to increase your offer given certain constraints. So there's sort of only so many moves that are available to you in negotiating with Google, and I suspect that a lot of Facebook, Amazon, Apple companies are pretty similar. So the only things you can really do is, one, show them a better offer, or two, have some kind of really convincing reason that's easy for them to dip into their pockets for. So an example of that is like a relocation thing, right? Like, I need to relocate. Can you give me X amount of money as a relocation bonus? Or, I have such and such stocks that are going to vest. Can you sort of give me such amount of money that basically makes it so it's sort of a wash, and I don't have to stay here for an extra period of time. So those are the sorts of arguments that Google will listen to. And I remember actually learning about this because I read a bunch of blog posts that were written by a Google recruiter who literally just said, these are the things we are allowed to do. We cannot do anything else. Whereas recruiters at other companies, especially startups, younger companies, they have a lot more leeway. And there are a lot other different kinds of moves you can make. But with Google, it's basically
and their stock has more variability. So it's more interesting conversation there too.
Absolutely, yeah. But pretty much at Google, like it's very, very your moves are very constrained. And so the only real things you can do after a certain point of negotiation is just basically be like, this is my other offer. Here's what I'm willing to do. If you give me this amount of money, then I will be strongly inclined towards signing.
Okay, so you told them your offer. They bumped it back up. So I don't remember what they bumped it up to, but so after Google bumped it up from Airbnb, after seeing your $220K offer from Airbnb.
Yeah.
What were you feeling at that point? What was your strategy then?
So at that point, it was mostly panic because it was like down to the very last day. I had to make my decision. I think I got the call from Google Friday morning because they've been telling me since Wednesday, I think, that they were going to take my offer back to the comp team and kind of rejigger it. I think the package was originally $184. This is all in. This is not salary. The package was originally $184. And they had told me that they were going to be able to beat $200K, which was what some of my other offers were coming into in total compensation. And that Friday morning, and I told everybody that Friday was the day I was going to make my decision. Friday morning, Google Recruiter called me, told me that they had moved the offer to, I think, 212. And that was essentially like the final iteration of the offer. So I was like, all right, cool. Thanks for letting me know. I will let you know my decision by the end of the day. I'd spoken with a bunch of my friends. I'd really deliberated over this, barely had gotten any sleep. And I had just kind of finally gotten to a place where I was like, I think I have to go with Airbnb. It just seems like the right place. I'm really excited about the company. I really like the people, really like the work. I think I got to go with Airbnb. Now, $220K was Airbnb's original offer. And I kind of, I say in the blog post, if there's one thing that my job search has taught me is that there's always more money on the table. And the one thing though that struck me was that Airbnb was my best offer by a significant margin. If you just think, all in compensation, right? They'd kind of totally unprompted offered me this really big offer with a significant margin between what they knew my second best offer was. And so, but I was like, but I still should negotiate. There's clearly still money on the table because they offered me this with minimal prompting.
So let's just be clear here. So at this point, Google's offer was 212 all in, and Airbnb's was 220.
Yeah.
And so, you decided you were going to negotiate for even more with Airbnb.
Yeah. Because the thing is that I knew, and this is kind of one of the principles that I talk about in my blog posts, is that the thing that you have to take advantage of as a candidate is that a company cannot read your mind. Like they just can't. That's kind of the way in which it's like a poker game, is that they, it's sort of like.
So I remember you writing about this in poker because there was a particular opponent, I think it was Strati or somebody, where you had this feeling playing against him that you're like, oh, this guy's reading my mind, but you have to rid yourself of that feeling. And you actually have to do that in all contexts of life, whether you're dating or dealing with a manager or dealing with an investor or dealing with somebody at the supermarket. Nobody can read your mind. Yeah,
exactly. And so, the number one thing that you have to remember is that, you might be somebody who's like, I would accept 220K in a heartbeat. And that's by far, I consider it to be by far my best offer, right? But Airbnb doesn't know that. Airbnb, like to Airbnb's eyes, I could well be somebody who gets 220K offer from Airbnb and just thinks, well, but Google's Google. Or thinks, well, but Google's offer is more cash heavy, or it's more guaranteed because they're a public company, and so I'm just offering Google I'm just valuing Google as being worth way more, right? Airbnb doesn't know how I value these things. Mm-hmm. And so if I don't tell it how I value these things, then it kind of has to act as though I could be any of those sorts of people. And that's sort of, again, like my leverage to actually negotiate in this final moment. Why would Airbnb offer me anything more? Because they don't actually know what I value and how I value it. So
this is the converse of the exploding offer, because the exploding offer obviously makes no sense, but to a dismayed interview candidate, it seems like a very real reality. And you can think of all kinds of conceivable reasons why an exploding offer would exist, but in fact, it makes no sense.
What do you mean by it makes no sense?
Well, I mean, the idea of an exploding offer is like, oh, yeah, we're going to take this offer off the table because we're not going to, we might not need an engineer at that point. Maybe we want to offer you less. Like the idea that your offer would somehow disappear, or I think the idea that the offer would disappear, what it represents is the idea that you working at this company would disappear. And that is so implausible and ridiculous that it doesn't really make any sense. But nonetheless, you are unable to read the mind of the recruiter, so therefore you can't really do anything but assume that they're not bluffing. And
right.
and as ridiculous as it sounds, that's how it works. And conversely, this is how it works with the Airbnb versus Google situation, where it doesn't really make sense for you to be saying like, oh, Airbnb, you should offer me even more money. But since they can't read your mind, they have to assume that you are in a mindset where it does make sense.
Right. I mean, so actually one thing I want to interject though in what you said is that, so an exploding offer makes sense from a sort of game theory perspective, right? It makes sense in for a company because if they always have exploding offers, then they always have this negotiating leverage, right? And so the thing that you're trying to read the company's mind on, quote unquote, is, how committed are you to this negotiating tactic of always having exploding offers, right? And the thing that I'd want to say is that what it means when I say that, you should treat a exploding offer like bullshit is not that you should just be like, oh, well, okay, cool, it's a 3-day expiring offer. I'm just going to wait 5 days because I know that they're not going to pull the trigger, right? Don't do that. That's a bad idea, because for a company to actually even have an exploding offer, they have to, from a game theoretic perspective, they have to actually honor it, right? Otherwise, everyone would just know that exploding offers literally didn't mean anything. You have to challenge the exploding offer itself. And so I just hope that no one hears this podcast and then is like, oh, great, got an exploding offer, I'm just going to ignore it, and because there's no way they'll enforce it, and then they lose their offer and then get mad at me. I hopefully am very clear on how you should approach an exploding offer, not that you should just ignore it and pretend that they're not going to do anything. So I get on the phone with Airbnb and I tell them, hey, this is what Google offered me. One thing I also should probably add as a caveat: don't lie, do not lie to companies. I can understand the temptation to. Do not do it. There's really no need to, and it will come back and bite you in the ass, because the Valley is a really small place, and a lot of these recruiters talk to each other and know each other. And I've heard this more than once from various recruiters, that they have caught candidates lying and about offers from other companies and just blacklisted them from the industry.
Right. So you don't want to say here, hey, by the way, Facebook called me and offered me $300K.
Yeah, exactly. Don't do that. Be honest. Now, you don't have to tell them information, but you cannot tell them false information. Right. That is a very important distinction there. So anyway, I call up Airbnb. I tell them this is the final offer that Google's given me. And what I tell them is that, well, Google's offer is very cash heavy, and that's very attractive to me. And, Airbnb comes with a lot of risk. So I'd really like to work for Airbnb, but in order for this offer to make sense, can you guys do, basically the stock has to be a stronger component. Can you bump the stock to make the offer $250K a year? Is basically the way that I present it. And my recruiter tells me, I'm going to take a look. I'm going to see if I can do this. I'll give you a call in the middle of the day. I sweat bullets for the rest of the day. And I'm just basically having a fever dream. And finally they call me. They tell me they can do $250K. And I'm like, well, shit, I guess I'm signing. And that is how I ended up now at Airbnb.
As an engineer, you want to minimize scalability issues. When there is high traffic to your application, you need your content delivered with 100% availability. CacheFly is the content delivery network with the fastest global throughput. Every application needs a CDN, whether you are in gaming or ad tech or social networking or e-commerce. If you're at scale, you need a CDN. Go to cachefly.com. That's CACHEFLY.com and use promo code SEDaily for a 14-day, 2 terabyte free trial. 65% of CacheFly customers use CacheFly for software distribution because CacheFly has the fastest throughput globally for large files. Try out CacheFly for free today. There's a 14-day free trial up to 2 terabytes of bandwidth. And if you use promo code SEDaily, you can help support Software Engineering Daily. If you want your app to be successful, you can't have delays and downtime. So check out CacheFly, CACHEFLY.com, and use promo code SEDaily for a discount. It would support the show. Now let's get on with the show. And thanks to CacheFly for being the newest sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. So let's take this to like the logical extreme, so I think that's a great conclusion. I'm very happy for you. It's very interesting, but just for the sake of the absurd, what would have happened if you would have gone further and said, I'm going to take this back to Google and say to Google, hey, I got $250K. Like, did you just have a feel for the situation that you had kind of reached the limit of playing these two sides off of each other?
Sure. Well, two things, I think. One is that, one of your strongest plays as a negotiator is to actually promise that you will sign, right? But it's sort of like your trump card. It's like your final move that you can make. When you tell a company, I will sign if X, they have much more incentive to produce X than if you say, it would be more attractive to me if you got the offer to X, right?
Right.
And so, like, especially on the final day when there's not that much room for go between, and also the fact that like Google takes much longer to actually approve compensation changes, right? And so it's actually quite plausible that if I wanted Google to get another iteration in, they just wouldn't have time before my deadline. But I think really a lot of it comes down to the power of the final move, right? The final, going all in, essentially. When you do that, you give yourself a lot more power to have the company meet you and be confident that you're going to do what you say, and actually they're going to win you, right? This is the last thing they have to do. So recruiters will often tell you, like, oh, okay, well, you want XYZ. Well, it's really hard for me to get XYZ. I have to go and talk to my manager. I have to go to the board. Whatever. They'll tell you all the horrible antics they have to engage in. Or it's like, yeah, I can only do this certain amount of times a month. So like I'm expending resources for myself that are very limited. So if you don't sign the offer, then I'm going to be very sad and you're going to hurt me, right? It's essentially, they won't say exactly that, but that's sort of the subtext that a recruiter will tell you. And they're right. Like they're not lying to you. But they are telling you this because they want this to influence you and make you feel bad. And they ideally want you to not negotiate without putting your actual money down, without saying that I'm going to buy.
So when I think of a company like Airbnb, I think of a company that wants to recruit mission-driven employees. And I think of a company that would say to their recruiters, if the person is playing hardball for the salary, just forget them, because we only want people who are true Airbnb supporters. They would like nothing more than to work at Airbnb. They're mission-driven employees. Did that ever cross your mind as like a source of risk, or do you think is that just like a weird narrative that's not actually true?
No. So actually, it's an interesting question, because I think actually there are two ways to put this. One is that somebody who is negotiating and trying to get the best offer, no company is going to be upset with you for doing that. No company at all. Even like startups will be understanding of this. But what all companies will be averse to is somebody who is money driven. And I think there's a very important distinction there, right? Wanting to have the best offer or wanting to like have the best fit for yourself has a number of different dimensions, right? Part of it is monetary compensation. Part of it is fit. Part of it is what you'll be working on. Part of it is who the team will be. Money is a part of that. And if the way you're presenting, the way you're making your decision to the company is purely, I just want to get the most money that I can from whatever company, all companies will get turned off by that. But if you say, this offer is compelling to me, I like the company, I like this thing, the money is, I'd like to see you guys do better on the monetary part, and especially if you provide reasons why. right? If you just say, and this is kind of a dumb thing about negotiation, or maybe just social protocol in general, but if you just cite a reason, right? Instead of just saying, I would like more money, if you just cite a reason, like any reason, it doesn't even matter how ridiculous the reason is. If you just say a reason, people will be like, oh, yeah, okay, oh, yeah, that's very reasonable, right? So if you just say, like, I want to buy a house in the next few years, or if you say, I'm going to get married soon and I need to save up money, or if you say, I want to pay off my student loans, or you say, I just really want to save money. Like the most, of course you do, right? Like it's almost meaningless to even say that. But if you just cite a reason, suddenly people are like, oh, they're not just money driven. They're not just horrible people. They have a really good reason. Oh, I want you to save money, so I'm going to try to see if I can improve your cash offer. And so, I don't know, this is a weird little brain hack that I think just somehow works, is that if you just cite a reason, even if it's stupid, people will just be more accepting of your desire for anything, whether it be, wanting to take time off, whether it be, more money, more stock, whatever it is. If you can cite a reason, just the act of reason giving makes people more willing to say, yeah, sure, we'll try to accommodate that.
So we still got a lot to talk about. You got 30 more minutes?
I can do however long you got.
Okay. All right, great. So let's talk about the broader picture. And you wrote a blog post about this that will be out by the time this episode goes out. Mm-hmm. What are the lessons of negotiate? Or let's talk more broadly. What should an engineer know about negotiation?
Oh, man, so much. There's definitely a lot to know. The two most common truisms that I think like you read everywhere on the internet when you read anything about negotiation, right? The two things everyone tells you is always negotiate and never say the first number. This is pretty much what if anyone knows anything about negotiation, these are the two things they know, and they pretty much know nothing else. So I think the second one is not always true, whether you should never say the first number. I think.
Yeah, I was going to say sometimes you want to anchor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like anchoring can be an effective strategy, and there are some times when like not saying the first number is just such a ridiculous thing to keep abiding by that you will just be difficult and cumbersome rather than actually being like an effective negotiator. And the second thing is, always negotiate. Yes, always negotiate, except when negotiating can potentially harm the relationship. This usually doesn't apply to a job search, though. So you can pretty much ignore that for a job search. So I think the two most important things in a negotiation are that most people don't understand is that one, negotiation is not zero sum. Okay, negotiation is not a game of poker. So poker is a zero-sum game. Zero-sum meaning that, if I win money, someone else by definition must lose that money that I won. Basically meaning that any interaction or any negotiation is just a transfer of resource from you to me or from me to you, right? Someone loses, someone wins the exact same amount. That is not the way negotiation works. Okay, and the sooner you understand this, the sooner you will be able to be an effective negotiator and find better solutions when trying to strike a deal with a company. So just one quick example. A company is actually most of the time much more willing to give you a signing bonus than to give you salary. Okay, why is that? The reason why is that if a company gives you salary, then they have to pay you that amount of money every year. That amount of money goes into their burn rate, right? Especially if they're a startup, then it's something they have to account for. It also potentially allows other employees who are sort of, at the same bracket as you, to be able to, if they find out your salary, to say, oh, he's getting paid this much. Why am I not getting paid that amount? Mm-hmm. Right? So it sort of potentially roils internal politics, and then it's harder to pay other people the same amount, right?
And signing bonuses have clawback rights.
Yeah, and signing bonuses have clawback rights, exactly. And so all those things make signing bonuses really attractive for a company. They don't have to pay them again. It's a one-time thing, and they're easier in a lot of ways to dole out. But for you might not care. In fact, you might actually like having cash up front because you want to buy a car or something, or I don't know, whatever, right? And so this is a case where your values and the company's values differ. And so to be a good negotiator is to find a place where I really want something, and it's really easy for you to give it to me. Right? That is where a negotiation becomes non-zero sum. So instead of fighting really aggressively for salary because I want more money, what I can do instead is realize or even ask, hey, is it easier for you to give me salary or to give me a signing bonus? And very often a company will just tell you they're not necessarily going to keep it secret. In fact, they usually won't, because they also want to find a mutually beneficial deal. So your job as a negotiator is not to, a lot of people think negotiation is about getting the best deal. And it's really not about that. Or at least it's not about that as your explicit goal. Your explicit goal should be to find the best way to produce value for both you and the company simultaneously. Because if that's what you're shooting for, you're going to find much better sort of local maxima than you would otherwise if the only thing you're thinking about is how can I get the most money.
Okay, so we have been talking about the negotiation process of a salary, which is more of a one-time type of negotiation, and you don't really have to have an ongoing relationship with the recruiter after you join the company. Mm-hmm. But there are other situations within engineering where if you make a negotiation, if you negotiate really hard or really, I don't know whatever adjective you want to describe to use your crafty negotiation, like if you were to apply those negotiation tactics to your one-on-ones with your manager, for example, you might toxify the relationship. Obviously, basically what I'm getting at is it is much different negotiation terms once you actually get to the company. So what are the types of negotiations that occur at a company once you are an employee? Right.
So before I answer that, I want to throw out the caveat that this is definitely something that I'm not going to claim expertise on, but I'm certainly happy to weigh in on. So I mentioned that, in a negotiation, oftentimes, so one thing I said is that you shouldn't always negotiate when the relationship matters, right? And when the relationship is potentially going to be affected by the negotiation. Certainly your relationship with your manager or with your, whoever it is that you're negotiating with the company for your compensation is exactly an instance of that. It's sort of like an iterated game, an iterated negotiation where this is not the last negotiation you're going to do. You're going to be doing many negotiations. And the way this person thinks of you is going to affect your work and your ability to get stuff done at the company. So what I would say is that, again, one of the most important things in negotiation is to be transparent about your values. Like, that's really, really important, and to give reasons. So when you're talking with your hiring manager about this, or your manager about this, I would mention what I want, like what I care about. So maybe it's that I care about career progression more than I care about actual salary. Maybe I care about salary more than I care about career progression. Maybe I want stock. Maybe I want cash. Be really clear about what you value and why. Second thing is I would give reasons why you want these things. Okay. So instead of just declaring, I want this, I want that, say, I want this because. And just, again, the act of reason giving, one, it kind of encourages more empathy and understanding of like what your motivation is. But again, it just sort of like has this really dumb effect of justifying almost what you're saying and why you want it. Just the act of providing a reason and not just declaring this is what you want will make someone feel more like I should try to satisfy this desire, because clearly there's some goal that you have in mind. It's a goal-directed request. So generally speaking, like, one thing I would also do is try to set expectations up front, right? So when you come in and join an organization and you start having one-on-ones with your manager, I would talk to them, like, don't just like sit there and wait in sort of stealth mode until the moment you decide, okay, now it's time to ask for a raise, or okay, now it's time to ask for a promotion, right? I think the thing to do is to say, okay, so I am motivated by career growth. I want to grow in this company and gain more responsibility, right? So let's sit down and talk about what would that trajectory look like. How, what is like an aggressive timeline for me to get a raise, or an aggressive timeline? Like what sort of things would I have to do? What sort of milestones would I have to meet? Set that conversation and make it the backdrop for your interactions with your manager, such that, it's no surprise when 3 months in, you say, okay, so do you think, sort of bring that conversation up to light that we talked about and we've been continuously talking about my career progression. It's been 3 months. I hit the milestone. I think that it's fair to say that you should consider me for a raise, right? The more that's not a surprise, and the more you set those expectations going forward about what this is going to look like, and kind of have, as much as possible, being able to say, like, yeah, you remember we said this, we had this conversation, and, I feel like I've done these things. Let's do it. This is what you told me.
Yeah.
And if you continually have those conversations with your manager, it's going to be much more effective than just bringing it all up kind of in one big surprising evening. What
else do you talk about in this negotiation blog post?
So a large part of basically like the structure of it is kind of guiding somebody through the principles of negotiation, but kind of with the backdrop of first getting a job offer, trying to leverage that into other job offers, and then negotiating among offers. But a lot of it is kind of like on the theory of negotiation, and also how to deal with a lot of the kind of like techniques or traps that companies will throw at you to try to either hinder you from negotiating or even stop you from negotiating altogether. So I can give you actually an example that I think was very interesting. Actually, I kind of enjoyed it.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah, totally. So I was talking with a company. This was like about the middle of my negotiations, where I was talking to. I think I had like 5 offers at this point. And so one company was talking to me, and they told me, so I have. So I can give you such and such amount of money, and I was telling them that I wanted them to do better, and that I had other offers that were stronger, and that like in order for me to consider this offer, they had to do better on some fronts. And so they were like, okay, you know what, I like you, believe in you, whatever. Just trying to be very very jovial and friendly. And the recruiter said to me, okay, you know what, I can do this for you. I can go out and I can probably get this offer, but I need to know from you that if I get this offer, you are not going to turn around and just go tell Google about this offer, right? That if I give you this offer, you are just going to consider it and take it on its own merits. You're not going to use this as leverage for negotiation. Now, this is the first time anyone ever asked me this, and so it kind of took me off guard.
It's a nice tactic, get you to play the trump card.
Absolutely, right. And so basically, this person was trying to say they were trying to push me in a way that would get me to not negotiate, basically give up my power. And one of the things that I say in my blog post about negotiation is that one of the principles about negotiation is you should always keep the door open to further negotiation until you are ready to make a decision. Okay, within reason. I mean, don't do crazy shit, but like be as mindful as possible that almost every company will be trying to close that door, and it's sort of your job to keep it propped open. Okay, so what this person was essentially asking me to do, this subtext here is, please stop negotiating. If you stop negotiating, I will go and get this better offer for you. And so I just challenged him, and I said, okay, let me be clear on what you're saying here. Are you saying that you will not give me this offer if I tell anybody else that you've given me this offer? And so he says, well, no, that's not exactly what I'm saying, because legally I can't say that. Actually, what I'm saying is that if I go and get this offer for you, it will be a violation of my trust if you take this offer and go negotiate with Google with it. And so then I say, okay, let me understand what you're saying here. So you are saying that if you give me this offer and I then tell anybody else about it, then I am in violation of your trust in giving me this offer in the first place. And he's like, okay, let me rephrase. I am going to go out and get you this offer, but I am going to just assume that you are not the kind of guy who's going to take this offer and turn it around and negotiate and like bring this to Google. And I'm like, all right, yeah, if that's what you want to do, absolutely, totally understand. And then of course I told Google about this offer, as I told other companies about each other's offers, because that is your right as somebody in the market for a job to have an open and competitive market.
Right. He was like the old Texas gamblers who are like, if you check raise me, you can't check raise here. We don't allow check raising.
Yeah, exactly.
If you check raise, you're going to get yourself shot.
Right. And what I said was like, let me understand. You are telling me that if I check raise, you are going to shoot me. You are going to kill me if I check raise you. And he's like, well, no, that's not exactly what I'm saying. Like, I'm not going to commit myself to that statement. And that's essentially what happened. Is that I was like, all right, if you want to labor under that impression, that's your life. You can do you can believe whatever you want. I am not going to tell you, because I'm not going to lie to you. That's like my principle when I negotiate. I am not going to say I will not go and speak with Google. And in fact, if he had played hardball with me, I would have said, cool, then yeah, don't go get that offer for me. I would have gone, walked all the way to the door and said, yeah, I mean, if that's what it is, if this is the best offer you can do, and I'm not going to make you the promise that I will not tell anyone else about what you offer me. That's just I'm not willing to do that.
Okay.
And if it meant walking away, I would have walked away.
Okay, I got some broader questions.
Cool.
Do you think that the tech industry is a cabal of companies that are keeping salaries artificially low?
Uh, so I know they've certainly done that in the past, right? And so there's this obviously big collusion case between a lot of the tech giants about
Google, Apple,
on salary. Yeah, exactly. So I think so now. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I would imagine there are probably some kind of soft ways in which there is some sort of coordination going on, but I think also there's so many players now in the market, and there's so many tech companies that it's just hard to actually collude that effectively, right? There may be some quote unquote collusion on sort of the upper bound, but because there's so many startups now competing for the same talent, there's so many other companies that need tech workers. I think it's just hard to play the same game.
Maybe, but the way that I think still that the way that the equity is structured makes there be some fundamental frictions in the market, even on the lower end where the people are actually getting hired.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate?
Well, so if I'm a venture capitalist and I own X% of a company, but that company has X% of cash, there's the company can't. There's still a ceiling on so because the owners of the company, the way that they have bought in, the way that they're incentivized is to get massive leverage out of their investments. The tech employees still cannot capture a large percentage of value that they are generating. So the way I look at it is you're an employee at a tech company. Oftentimes you're producing software that has $1 million of value in annual returns, but you get paid $100,000 to write that software. And so I think of the margin between that $900,000 margin, I think of as this suspicious, like, why isn't the engineer capturing more of that? And what I would say is that the reason that the engineer doesn't capture more of that is because the way that incentives are fundamentally structured is such that the people who are investing in the company need to make these big returns. And so it's essentially like this macro market structure that is pressuring the salaries lower. And kind of until that sort of starts to diminish, which it is with different funding environments, more transparency in the funding market, more bootstrapping, less need of funding. Like I see all these factors that are eating away at this what I would call exploitation on the potential of the 10x engineer.
Sure.
I don't know. Does that sound like a?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much I want to weigh in here because it's way outside my field of expertise, but it does sound like what you're describing is much more a function of capitalism than of any particular, or like any concerted collusion between companies or among companies rather. I mean, I would say, like this is true in most industries. Right. This is not a unique feature of engineering, but it's also true that like engineers are not organized. Like there's no union that can negotiate in unison, and so there are definitely a lot of coordination problems among tech workers. But I would be very skeptical of the claim that there's something special going on right now. That's not just a feature of capitalism itself.
Okay, but here is what is interesting and unique about it is the fact that in past situations, like you're a assembly line worker at a cannery in the 1920s or 1930s or whatever.
Sure, yeah.
You can't go start your own cannery because the upfront costs are so high. But
right.
In engineering these days, the upfront costs have gotten so low that if you want to go start a podcast or start a software company, you can go and do that. It's a little bit different. You have alternatives. If you say, I don't like this deal where I get paid $100,000 to write software that generates $1 million, if you don't like that deal, you can go do it elsewhere. But I don't know. This is what I think is interesting.
Yeah, but I think you have to be careful though about what the actual alternative is for most engineers. Like the reality is that most engineers would be shitty founders. And most engineers would start a company that is not very likely to succeed. If you actually look just at like the cream of the crop of founders, right? If you look only at, let's say, like YC founders, I think I remember reading that the average YC founder, of course, like this is very very top heavy, right? But the average YC founder makes about $1 million a year in expected value. Just throwing a dart on the board and finding a YC founder. that's pretty good. But obviously, there are many, many companies that don't get into YC. And not only that, but there's much, much higher variance. And it's, very, very, it's kind of black swanish, right? Where most of the value is in a very, very small percentage. And human beings hate that. Like, human beings hate those kinds of probability distributions. And so, venture capitalists like it because they can invest in 100 companies simultaneously. As a human being, you can only invest in one. And
well, but this comes back to the whole, idea of, the Peter Thiel thing. Like, if you think you're in a lottery, then you've psyched yourself into behaving like you're in a lottery, and it's going to make you lose like you're in a lottery. And if you decide that you're not in a lottery, then your mindset will be different, and you will succeed like you're in a deterministic environment. To me, that's just patently untrue. Like, there's no way that can be true, right? If you're claiming that there is no randomness or no noise in companies being founded and succeeding, look at repeat founders. Look at founders who founded really successful companies. You can see a few of them who've I don't know, obviously Elon Musk and Peter Thiel are good examples, who founded subsequent companies and they were really successful. The vast majority of repeat founders don't hit home runs their second go around, because obviously there just aren't that many home run companies. And there are many companies in the past that have been home runs. Well, we also have an extremely low sample size for how long a period of time it's been where you can feasibly start two companies.
Sure, that's true. But there were many successful companies that have been founded in the last 15 years that the founders left, sold within a few years, right, or 4 or 5 years, and founded subsequent ventures, and their rate of success is higher. It's kind of like in poker, like in tournaments, right? In a tournament of poker, even if the best player in the world enters into a poker tournament, his absolute chance of winning is very, very low. It's, in any large tournament, it's less than 1%, even if he's by far the best player in that tournament. Now, that doesn't mean that a tournament is a lottery. It's sort of, the way I like to describe it, it's sort of like a lottery where you have 5 tickets, which is still plus EV. It's still, good, but I think it would be an illusion to say that, it's not a lottery at all. It's actually totally deterministic. It's clear that there's a lot of noise and randomness in founding a company, the same way that there is in a poker game. There is a lot of skill involved, but that skill just, it adds to your expected value, but it doesn't necessarily raise the chance of success, period, or to a significant margin. So what I would say is that, one of the reasons why it is not necessarily unfair, I'm not saying it is fair, but it's not necessarily unfair that, the expected value for a tech founder would be much higher than what they're getting paid at a company to work just as a software engineer, is that you are paying for that risk aversion, right? You are paying for that guaranteed payout. And I know a lot of people in poker who, get staked or basically have somebody bankroll them precisely for the reason that they don't have to risk any of their own money. And they give up some of the expected value for that peace of mind and for that knowledge that I will definitely win money because of the structure of this thing. There's no chance that I waste a year of my life and a lot of stress because, I have this guaranteed payout. And human beings, I think, are wired to want that.
Right. The downside is capped. Yeah, and I think what becomes interesting about this for me personally is that this is getting pretty off base, but it's just it seems like there's you know what, we don't need to go down this rabbit hole too much further. We've been down it enough times. I want to talk about earning to give, which is another thing that you talk about a lot, and you're heavily involved and you're interested in it, and you put your money where your mouth is, literally. Why don't you explain what earning to give is and talk about how it impacts your salary?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. So I first became aware of earning to give, I think, around 2013, which is a couple of years after I quit poker, and or I think 2014 actually. And I made a lot of money when I was a poker player, and then when I was I think in 2014 I gave away all the money that I'd made, and shortly after I came across this idea of earning to give. And the idea of earning to give is, if you want to help the world in the most principled and effective way, meaning that what you want to do for the world is not just some kind of token feel-good experience of I'm going to go volunteer on weekends, or I'm going to go work at a soup kitchen and see the community and help out people who are less fortunate than myself. If you if what you want is not just to feel good about what you're doing or to feel like you're a good person or even to just get sort of tokens of social status, but what you really are motivated by is actually reducing the suffering in the world as much as possible. Meaning that, like, what I care about is not do I feel good, not do I look good, but can I actually put a dent in the suffering in the world? Basically being scientific and more rational about how to actually make the world a better place. If you are devoted to that project, then it sort of raises this thought experiment, which is like this. Essentially, let's say that I wanted to, I wanted to try to improve the world as much as possible. One thing I could do, and that occurs to a lot of people, is, okay, why don't I go out and, volunteer in Africa, right? Just quit my job, go out there and I don't know, join the Peace Corps or something. Well, but what if instead I went out and became a lawyer? And I did lawyer stuff. I wasn't like a human rights lawyer or anything extravagant. I was just like a big law, working for banks or whatever. And the work that I did was totally amoral. It was just neutral, right? It didn't have any particular effect either way. Because, if I didn't take this job, some other lawyer would take this job. So on average, I'm basically doing something that would be done anyway. But I take the money that I'd be paid. Right. And if you're a lawyer at a big law firm, you might make like $160K a year. And I take a large chunk of that money and I donate it to the company or to the the nonprofit that would otherwise be sending someone instead of me to go and do that work, or hire someone locally to do that work that I would have otherwise done, and maybe to hire two people to do the work that I would otherwise done. And so you very quickly arrive at this notion that maybe in fact the way to be the most charitable, the way to do the most good in the world, is actually not by going out and being on the front lines yourself, but by taking advantage of the fact that in the first world, in the United States, there's so much economic inequality that, which is very strange. It's very strange that like somebody who grows up and is just as intelligent, just as capable in Zimbabwe, is able to make thousands of dollars a year, and you as somebody who's like pretty good, pretty smart, you work kind of hard, can make tens of thousands of dollars a year very, very easily just because of where you're born. This is very strange. And by taking advantage of this economic inequality, you can sort of use that as a lever to say, okay, I'm going to pursue a career that makes a lot of money purely with the intention of taking that money and donating it to highly effective charities that can do as much work as possible around the world, more than I could do myself if I went directly and worked on these things. And that's sort of the argument for Earning to Give. So I read this argument and I was convinced. I was like, this argument makes sense. I don't, it's convincing to me. And so I decided that I was going to go out, this is kind of after post-poker, that I was going to go out and try to find a higher earning career so that I could donate more money and earn to give. So I, one of the ways that I was thinking about law, I was thinking about business, and then finally I converged on software, particularly so that eventually I could go out and found my own company. And I thought the best way to get there would be to start as a software engineer, learn how, software products are built, because, it's no surprise to many people that engineers tend to make some of the best founders. So that's what brought me out to Silicon Valley. And so I've come out here with the very discreet intention that I want to try to earn a strong compensation package and donate as much as I can to charity. So right now I donate 33% of everything that I make. So whether that be salary, whether that be stock, whatever it is, 1/3 of everything pre-tax I donate to high-impact charities. And my goal eventually is to donate 50% of everything I make, which is the maximum amount that the IRS allows you to deduct from your actual income. And one of the other goals that I have explicitly is to try to encourage other people to do the same. So that's Earning to Give.
So I'm in almost complete agreement with you here, but you are a very smart guy, and many charities that you might give to are, on the whole, maybe less smart. So why would you give money to a charity rather than aggressively reinvesting in yourself and your career and your ability to start businesses and your ability to accrue interest, your ability to compound interest? Wouldn't the Hasib personal investment fund compound interest at a higher rate that you could eventually deploy into some sort of technology company where you could make even higher exponentially compounding growth rate of money rather than leak along the way and give away to charities?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and it's one that I hear a lot from software people, because I think it's kind of a common refrain that this kind of attitude.
It's a very convenient one too.
It is a very convenient one, which makes you have to be a little bit more skeptical than you'd otherwise be. But let's actually look at the argument. So essentially, what you're saying is that, first of all, let me tell you where I agree with you. I agree with you that anybody who's earning to give, or generally anybody who has a career, should reinvest aggressively in themselves. Like, if you're not doing that, you are making a fundamental mistake, because most of the money you're going to make as a worker is in the future. It's not right now. Right. Same is true for me as anybody, unless you're like at the very tail end of your career, obviously. So, absolutely, like there are ways in which I make sure to reinvest in myself, and I don't skimp on those investments. So whether it be like, taking courses, or spending time working on things that I think are going to make me a better at what I do, I absolutely don't skimp on those things, and I don't think that you should. That said, if you are a software worker or a tech worker, that usually doesn't impair your ability. Those expenses are relatively small relative to the compensation that you're receiving, for the most part, depending on where in the world you live. So that I'd agree with, and that absolutely, if you are making very little money, or you have student loans to pay off, or whatever, do those first. I absolutely say you should do those first before you earn to give, or rather, donate that money to charity. Now, the second part of that argument, though, is like, okay, well, why don't you just compound the interest? Why don't you just save the money and invest in yourself? Or why don't you just save the money and make smarter decisions than the dumb people who are running charities? So one place where I will concede is that most charities are not very effective, or we don't actually know whether they are effective. So this is one of the big tenets of effective altruism, which is the movement of which I'm now part, is to really, again, scientifically look at charities, and using the scientific method, using things like randomized controlled trials and good analyses of what impact are these charities actually having, and not just blindly assume that because the company or because the charity is doing a good thing, that it's working, or that the thing actually produces positive baseline results. You should be skeptical as a default as to whether charities actually do what they claim to be doing, or that they're actually putting the money to use in the most impactful way. So there's this organization called GiveWell, which actually does this sort of analysis of charities, not just how much money is going to fundraising, how much money is going to paying people, but literally per dollar spent, how much good is done in the world, how much are diseases reduced, how much is malnutrition reduced, how much are deaths reduced as a result of $1 spent on this intervention in some part of the world. So that's the first step, is that you can actually find charities, or you can have other very smart people find them for you, that are proven and have a very, very solid case for high impact per dollar spent. Now, the second thing, though, is, well, okay, why don't I just save up money and do smart things and make me even more money and then donate it all when I'm dead? So sort of, Andrew Carnegie style, right? So two reasons why I'm very skeptical of this. One is that the reality is that, you will have much less influence over other people in your lifetime if that is what you do. And I think one of the most impactful things you can do as somebody earning to give is not just give your own money, but convince somebody else to do the same, right? It's much more scalable if, in fact, by being an example of somebody who's earning to give, you influence 3 people to earn to give. Suddenly, you have multiplied your giving by 4, right? There's a huge
network
multiplier
effects.
effect. Right, huge network effects that you get when you do this openly in the course of your life, rather than just in one lump sum when you die. And it also just is less impressive to people, right? It's actually not a big deal, and it's not particularly hard, right? It's not a token of virtue if somebody gives all their money to charity instead of giving it to their families when they're dead. This sort of thing happens all the time. No one notices. It's not particularly affecting to people. But seeing people, and this is very much the experience that happened to me, when I learned that there are people who were doing this, who are going out in the industry and giving half of what they make, who are making hundreds of thousands of dollars and living in very modest apartments, working in finance or working in tech, because this is why they came out here, to do this. That's really compelling. That's really wow, that person is living in this really principled and awesome and complete way, and I want to emulate that. I think that's more convincing to people. But I want to add one more thing. The last thing that I want to say is that you always have to keep into account the probability that you will change your mind. Like you cannot just assume that you will do what you say because you said you'll do it. Like this is sort of the oldest fallacy in human history, right? Is because I said that I'm not going to eat donuts, I'm not going to eat a donut for the next week. Like, of course not. That's a ridiculous statement. And so to say like, okay, well, I'll donate all the money when I'm dead, or I'll donate all the money when I'm making a lot or when I'm older, chances are you won't, because most people don't. And most people are idealistic when they're young. And so the best way that you can ensure that you will actually do this, right? The best way to maximize your sort of expected amount of charity given is to actually do it now and create sort of a habit and a sense of self around this. That will much more guarantee that you will do it, rather than just the very human instinct of trying to put it off because it's something that's undesirable now. It's probably going to be even more undesirable in the future.
And I suppose what you're saying here also is just that by, maybe you're not saying this, but you maybe can tell me if that's true. If if you were to save up money more aggressively rather than give it away, it probably would not expedite you doing something groundbreaking like creating the iPhone and causing a step change improvement in humanity by building a new technology, and then by generating all this new capital off of that. Probably your closeness to that type of innovation is not bounded by having an extra $200,000 in the bank.
Well, so I don't want to be dogmatic about it, right? So I would say, if you're earning to give, you should definitely be saving money, because it does, like, again, it's sort of investing in yourself, right? You want to have enough of a cushion that, for example, if you leave your job, you are okay in finding a next job. You're not out on the street. That's going to really significantly impair you in your ability to like get shit done and actually build your career, which is an important element of earning to give, is to actually build a successful career. But the second thing that I want to say is that I'm not, in principle opposed to somebody spending money on themselves or saving money or anything along those lines, or even investing in their own projects over giving to charity. You just have to be able to provide a principled argument and a convincing argument why this is higher ROI or why this is higher return, if in fact this is sort of part of the project of earning to give, which I don't think you should make everything about earning to give. You shouldn't paralyze yourself. I think it's best to sort of compartmentalize and say, okay, this percentage of my income is for earning to give. The rest of it, I'm just a normal person and I just spend on whatever frivolous things I want to. Because I think just as human beings, we function better that way. But again, like I'm not in principle opposed to the idea that like, okay, I want to found a startup. I'm going to need some savings. So I'm going to, give less for now. And I think that founding the startup is going to do more for the world. It's going to, have some direct positive effects on the world, or it's going to allow me to have a lot more money and allow me to donate more of that. I say, yeah, that's a great argument. Do that. That's very convincing. But to say instead, like, okay, well, why don't I just invest it all in index funds, or like go and put it on the stock market because I think I'm great at picking stocks or whatever, and it's going to produce much better returns than I think giving it to charity now. I think that again is not a very principled argument. I think it's very hard to make that case, because I've actually heard this before from people who push back against earning to give, that, well, why not give, put the money into index funds and then 40 years from now when it doubles, then give it to charity, right? Then that's more money you've given to charity. And if you just look at the argument on one side, on the cash side, then it's like, yeah, that obviously is correct. The problem with that, though, is that you're ignoring the ROI on giving to charity now. Right? There's ROI on both sides. There's continuing returns on both sides. If you, for example, give to a company like AMF Against Malaria Foundation is like the top ranked charity in the world by GiveWell. And basically what they do is they provide anti-malarial bed nets for $3 a piece that basically reduce the rate of malaria and thereby the rates of death, illness, all these things in many parts of Africa and Asia. So super great intervention, super cheap, alleviates a lot of suffering in the world. You might think, well, I can buy twice as many bed nets if I wait 40 years. Well, the problem, of course, is like, what about the return on value and the return on like the less suffering that happens from the people who now have less malaria and don't die?
The compounding of human potential.
Exactly. Of like economic progress, of infrastructure that can be built now because there's less malaria. Like all that stuff is on the other side of the equation.
Yeah.
You cannot just look at one side. And chances are, and I would a very strong argument that it would be very surprising if the stock market had a better rate of return on reducing suffering than the best charities in the world right now. That would be very strange. And if it were true, then everybody should be putting money in the stock market, right? Nobody should be donating to the charities right now because like the stock market would just be this crazy money-making machine that everybody would be putting money into. If you believe that argument, then you should say that everyone should do that. But it's clearly not correct. If it makes sense to do that work now, then we should be like if in a perfect world we were putting money into that now. If we were not hitting the point of diminishing marginal returns, then we should keep putting money there, and that is the best place to put money. So yeah, I don't think that argument holds under scrutiny.
All right, well, Haseeb, this has been an awesome conversation. We've gone much longer than typical episodes.
Sorry about that.
No, it's my pleasure to talk to you. So I really appreciate you coming back on the show. I'm really happy that your career has successfully migrated to tech, and
thank you.
I will continue to be your weird cheerleader, as you have called me in the past.
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Important role in my life.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course.